want you guys to enter what words come to mind when you hear human-centered IT. All right, so we're seeing some things come up. Empathy, that's a big word today, right? Compassion. Some of my favorite ones are coming up, and one of them's really big up there. Customer focused, because Kelly was talking about this earlier too. And I always say, and Nate and I had a moment last night when we connected, because IT is customer service. Really, what you guys are all doing is to support the mission of the companies that you work at. Otherwise, we're overhead, right? So how do we make that mission, how do we make IT a competitive advantage for our organizations, right? Here's our topics. We're going to talk about trust, safety, and governance, strategic adoption and use cases, and practical business impact. So going on to trust, safety, and governance. We're going to do one more interactive thing. What terrifies you the most about AI? And this stuff is going to help the professors as they answer some of these questions to know where you guys are at. Losing my job, getting left behind, picking the wrong system, Skynet, yep, of course. All right, Charles, let's try to use AI here. So we've got 9 responses about job displacement, 9 responses about misinformation, unknown future, that could be job displacement as well as privacy. So let's start out with this question, okay? We'll start with Dr. Harris. When we talk about AI safety, what does that actually mean for the people who use these or are affected by AI systems?
So I think it means not being stupid. We've got, the old saying, the average intelligence of your user of an IT system is also the biggest problem that you're likely to face, with the individuals not really knowing how to use or interact with these systems perhaps the way in which they should. And so I've got a quick story that I can tell about January of 2023, which was fun for me because faculty were coming back from their long vacations and realizing that ChatGPT had just landed and that students were going to use all of this stuff for cheating. And there were some quite emotional interactions with more senior faculty, I'll be charitable, more senior faculty saying, listen, I've got to change my entire approach to the way in which I teach. This is my life, this is my identity, and the system is taking that away from me. I've got to rethink everything. And started blind panic. How do I check students for cheating, this, that, and the other? The fun thing about academics that it takes them about 2 weeks, 3 weeks before they realise that if there's a system to be gamed, they're going to game it themselves. So we went from students being accused of cheating to faculty being accused of cheating. And so the faculty using it to grade, to create tutor bots and do things like that, and denigrating the experience that they have with their students. And so by not having those honest conversations about how you can use these systems appropriately and playing in safe spaces, we had a lot of issues that we could have avoided had we had those conversations. Another nice thing about the governance aspect, and I can't believe this, apart from Dan and I, there are no other faculty members here, right? Before I say this. Okay, good, and it's not being recorded, so good. I feel a little more safety in saying what about it.
It is being recorded. Let's say it anyway.
That's fine. I'll say it anyway. Okay. No, it is being recorded. Okay, fair enough. So I'll be a little more polite. How's that? Our faculty governance of IT is significantly robust in its structure and its settings, which basically means if you have an issue, it goes to the government structures, usually to die. And it will take a very long time before we get around to determining whether or not we approve of a particular system or not. That actually saved us. The other sort of ace in our hole was the fact that we didn't have a president. We had a new president coming in, so we were told to pause a little bit, think about how the new provost and the new president would react to some of these AI features and things like that. So we didn't rush to get ahead of anybody. We've been doing AI at RIT for the last 25 years, believe it or not. So we didn't panic. We sat back and thought to ourselves purposefully, how do we actually start to engage people in these systems and do it in a way that is responsive? I'm not saying that we've got everything right, but I think from a governance perspective, we were probably ahead of the game.
Very good. You've been doing AI at RIT for 25 years. We've been doing it for 26 at the University of
I
honestly, it's just a joke. It's a dumb joke. It was an easy joke. The ball was right in front of the pocket. And I tapped it in. You all have been doing safety and data and governance for decades. Nothing has changed in that way. HIPAA still is the name of the game at the medical center, and there are all sorts of standards. And so you've done the heavy lifting on what this is. And yeah, it's a new set of tools. And in fact, they're not tools, they're agents that are sitting on top of that data. And how it's doing what it's doing is, a concern and a question. But the infrastructure is there in the way that you all do your jobs in terms of how you deal with data and governance and safety and privacy and that sort of thing. When it comes to the quality of the work, ultimately it's your name. When you use AI, ultimately it's your name that's on the work. And that should be enough of a motivator in terms of quality and safety and making sure that the work you are handing in as your own, and I'm not talking about students, I mean the work that you're doing in real life, that email you send, that report that you create, that prototype that you build, that application, it's your name on that. And so of course you're going to care very much about the quality of that work. Nothing changes in that way. We sort of have to change our mindset around that to make sure that just because it's a little easier to generate content and easier to generate copy doesn't mean you should click send, or doesn't mean that you should click it's time to go live on this thing. So really that's where I wanted to start with governance and safety.
What are your views on recent developments with AI sycophancy revealed with the ChatGPT 4 to 5 transition?
Yeah, I'll go. It really is, it's borderline annoying. Either I ask the greatest questions in the world, or it is just giving me nonsense. Every question I see asked, that's a great question, Dan. And it's a little much, okay? And one of the things that, it goes back to your earlier concern of, am I going to be replaced? That's everybody's first question. How do I put it?
Ask AI.
Well, your tone, so when we think about jobs that are new in AI, what will be jobs that didn't exist a few years ago that may exist in the future? One of them is managing the tone of your AI and making sure that that is right for your company, that it has the right level of push or the right level of sycophancy or deferring to the customer, but also being businesslike. You have control over that, and the more you use AI, the more specific you can be with that. I do think that's a developing job, is how to get the tone right for yourself and your own personal productivity with AI, but also in the in your corporate initiatives as well.
Sure. So what I like about these sorts of questions is underlying that question, if you dig a little deeper, is probably someone thinking, heck, this stuff is constantly changing. So let's ask these guys on the stage, what do they think about the transition? I don't know about this transition from 4 to 5, but I do know there'll be a transition from 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8. That's the problem with academia, certainly a problem of my existence, is that as an expert in a particular area or concept, you fear that you're never going to ultimately know the actual answer. And I've got something to tell you, you're never going to know the actual answer because things are going to move continuously. But get this, we've had these problems before. We had it with the social media revolution around 2006, 2007, and we had it with the lovely internet in the late 1990s. We seem to forget that we've been through some of these sorts of technical transitions in the past. I hate the word revolution, not just because I'm from England, but evolution is something that I prefer to think of in terms of these sorts of technical developments. It's all going to evolve. You are all going to be out of date with the knowledge that you have at some stage, and at some stage you've just got to learn to love the bomb, as they say. It's going to change. So how do you react to that and try and stay ahead of some of these developments? I understand how in your profession as well, this probably makes you feel really uncomfortable. I knew a lot about this area, now I don't. Now I'm becoming the older person in the room. The kids are coming up through behind that really love this stuff and they know it, and they're usurping my power, or my perception of the power that I have. And I don't see that changing. So whilst I don't know really the difference between 4 and 5, all I can say is that those transitions are just going to keep coming through, and we've just got to try and stay ahead of the game to the best that we possibly can.
So, before we move along, I think one of the things we should talk about is biases in AI. And one of the discussions we have here is many people don't notice bias in technology until it affects them directly. Where do you see the biggest risks to everyday users when it comes to fairness and trust in AI?
For sure. I literally taught this on Tuesday, so this is fresh in mind. The bias isn't going away. So if you've got if you got the most perfect data set in the world, there still would be bias just because of the nature that this is predictive text. And it's not going to a database and retrieving an answer. It is using its training to predict the most plausible next word. So the central lesson of bias is that we probably won't get rid of it. There are ways that you can mitigate it and make it a little bit better and be aware of it and that kind of thing. But ultimately, it's not going away. And so how you address that and how you incorporate that into your workflows is a really important part of using AI. So it is just being able to put into your workflows, okay, I don't know that this is biased, but where could the bias exist in this system? And we've got to talk about it in the room, and you need representation in the room, and you have to make sure that you are having conversations around bias. I don't think any conversation about AI is complete unless you have talked about what is potentially going wrong here, how is it going wrong. Now, there are a couple different ways to think about the bias. So, in a very simple way, if you're using AI to help you come up with a new tagline, so for marketing purposes or something like that, if it gives you a biased answer, you don't use that answer. It's pretty easy to see if it's biased, and you don't use it. It gets trickier when you're using it for things like approving loans and stuff like that, where the bias can be really damaging. So, as in any business school, every single question that gets asked is about risk. If you work the word risk into every answer in business school, you're going to get an A in the class.
I know.
Yeah, if you get risk in there. So you have to think about the risk of what it is that you're doing and what happens if it goes wrong and how much is it going to slow us down to get it right. Where does a human need to check it and those kinds of things.
Before we go to the doctor, another pro tip, it depends, is the other one.
Yeah, that's another
That would
good
be
one
an
for
A.
business. Yeah, it depends.
I mean, there's bias in all forms of life, in every interaction. You know, to suggest that there wouldn't be any bias is somewhat ludicrous. From my point of view, 2 words will save us from ourselves, and that is our ability to think critically. If you're thinking critically, you will ask the right questions. You won't be asking silly questions on silly systems, getting silly answers that will draw silly conclusions that will hopefully not get you fired. But if you're thinking critically about how you're using these systems, you will have an innate sense of whether or not there is bias in what is being reported out to you. And so being able to think critically, I think, are the 2 skill sets that you really do need to have when you're using these sorts of systems. If you can't think critically, then you shouldn't be allowed near a system because you're quite clearly not capable of drawing appropriate conclusions from the questions that you're asking. And that is a very human endeavour. And until AI takes over and starts to be able to think critically itself, well, then we're all screwed. But I think we'll be okay.
So before I do want to move on to the next topic, but this is a great question. So as educators, do you fear that the student population and maybe even the faculty population will eventually become less intelligent due to using AI?
Not on my watch, definitely not. We're finding there's a lot of pushback if you read the subreddit forums at RIT, and that's one of my guilty pleasures, I do like to deep dive into those, you will see huge pushback from the younger generations on the use of AI. My 13-year-old says she doesn't want anything to do with AI because, and I said, why? Because it uses too much water. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. I understand that. But it can blow your mind in terms of your ability to do really good things. She's like, no, I don't want to be anywhere near it. We have communication students feel the same way about it, strategic planners that feel the same way about it. We have artists that are absolutely diametrically opposed to using any of these sorts of systems. I think it's our job as educators to make sure people understand how they should and could use these systems and how they can fall foul of them as well if they don't think critically about what they're using them for.
Very good. I love this question. And I don't think it's only about students. I think it's about everybody in this room. Fundamentally, there is nothing so powerful as the moment that somebody is stretching for an idea and they can't quite get it. And they're fumbling with the words, and what's happening in that moment is their brain is rewiring. They're learning. They're reaching for something. That's where the really exciting stuff happens. Now, AI can, it should not replace that. So we as educators have to think a little bit differently, and we already have. We run an AI workshop for every incoming student. They get a couple hours with me, and I show them how to use it right. And this year I delivered this message, which was, hey, we know that you're using AI on your homework, and you should be using AI on your homework. And so, therefore, all of the homework that we get is about the same quality, so nobody has differentiated themselves. So we're going to still give homework, and you still got to do it, but the emphasis of our class has moved to participation and literally and tests and final exams where AI is not possible. It's handwritten and those kinds of things. It's verbal presentations. It's those kinds of things. And how did you do on a case in the room, in the moment? And because it goes back to that earlier idea of it is when that idea is just out of grasp, that's when it's all forming. That's when your experience is forming.
Very good. Thanks, guys. Strategic adoption and use cases. So Kelly touched on this as well when she said someone within the organization said we should be using AI, right? Without defining a goal for implementing AI. So you rank the following challenges of AI agents in order of significance. In privacy issues, that's how you know you're in a room full of IT people. Because when this is with business people, that's the bottom of the list, okay? All right. Okay, so let's go with this question. We'll start with Dr. Hare. What are some ways businesses can use AI to support human decision-making instead of replacing it?
So many different what problems are you trying to solve? I mean, certainly from a marketing perspective, every aspect of the marketing planning process has potentially been impacted by these systems, these technologies. So I'll give you an example. I had the pleasure of teaching in China last year, and some of their MBA students put entire marketing plans together in less than 60 minutes. And that was absolutely blowing my mind. Fully referenced, fully documented, not using any American system, but using their own homegrown ones. And the fact that they could actually identify these sources and make legitimate claims to possible next steps blew me away. That's the level of competition that we're dealing with here. These young kids that are living and breathing this stuff. I think it would be an easier question to ask, well, what areas where you can't use AI to help with human decision making? I think the important part of that conversation, though, is being transparent with everyone within the organisation to say, well, look, what are the problems that we're trying to solve, and how would you go about using AI? Before you do it, actually have those conversations. How would you solve this particular problem? So we can start to share best practices. In academia, you have it in your lives as well. We have people that we refer to affectionately as gold brickers. They find a gold brick, and they're not going to tell anybody else about that little gold brick because it makes them feel good and powerful and smart. The idea is to expose those gold bricks so that everybody has a sense of how you can enhance what you're doing. And also acts as a safety check to make sure that what you're doing isn't really very stupid, and have that conversation about those sorts of things.
Yeah, very good. it comes back to a very central idea, which is that the world still needs you to be an expert. It still needs you to know how do your workflows actually work, and how can they be improved? This is the big question that I struggle with. Is that how do you make sure that people who don't have a lot of experience gain experience? Because the way we all gained experience was you get it wrong and you make mistakes and you have a client sort of beat you up about it, or you have a boss that rides you about this kind of thing. And that's the way you build expertise. And I'm a little worried about that because the floor on expertise has raised just a little bit. That marketing plan can be done very quickly, and it's pretty good. It's not great yet, but it's pretty good. And so we still need the experts to take something and make it great. And that only happens through experience. And some of that experience is negative. And some of that experience is that's the way you learn it. I love teaching athletes because they're great at making, and musicians, they're great at making mistakes and learning from it and saying, okay, that didn't go well, I'm going to do it differently the next time, and there you go. And I really want to make sure that we're holding on to that, because it is that expertise that allows you to rethink how you're doing things at work. And yeah.
So to that point, I used to think that about 2 months ago, one of the best futuristic jobs that you could ever possibly want to hold would be a prompt engineer and make a ton of money being a prompt engineer. I've since done some deep reflecting on that, and I've come to the conclusion that we should all be prompt engineers with the level of expertise that we have. So going back to these Chinese students, I would like to think that I've given them the right questions to ask of the various component parts of the marketing planning process so that they could get the responses. But it was really only that I could look at those and say, yeah, this works or doesn't work, given the level of expertise that I have.
So, that you guys mentioned AI impacting instructors, and do you believe it will impact the cost value perception? And this says education, but I really think it's in general, it's that marketing plan.
Well, my response would be immediately, well, you've not been professionally trained in this particular area. You therefore don't know what questions to ask in depth, in repeated fashion, to get the sorts of answers that are going to be effective. And you don't know if what that has just spat out and generated is actually going to work or not. The chances are it's probably not going to work that well. I used to be worried, I think most of our colleagues were worried, again, January 2023, the world is falling down there, nobody's going to come and get a degree education from us. We had the same problem with MOOCs back in the 2019s, 2018s as well. Again, this cyclical nature of technology coming in, laying claims to acting as major disruptors, have turned out to be pretty false in that regard. So I'm not concerned about students wanting to come and get their education from a degree, a place of higher education like RIT, and of course the U of R, across the river, because of the connections, the human connections, thinking about the topic of the conference that we're all here, that you build with your community, with other students, with the staff, with the faculty, the ability to solve those problems by using that power of that community. AI is not going to replace that need, or the value that you can get from those sorts of interactions that you have in that.
We got one more. Professor Keating, we'll start with you on this one. What's your advice for separating genuine usefulness from marketing hype? Every company claiming AI-enabled offer.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we're in a very distinct phase of this thing right now. Every technological disruption has the exact same shape. And there's some people in the room that have been through a few of these disruptions. You mentioned social media, you mentioned the smartphones, there's the internet, I'm old enough for that. But they all have the exact same shape. Right when the disruption happens, we spend a lot of time working on how can we do what we were already doing, but just do it a little bit better. And that is very clearly the phase that we're in now. How do I take my workflows and improve them and just do it better, faster, easier, reach that customer in a voice that they like or that they respond to. The next phase of it, though, is where things get really interesting, which is what can we do that we couldn't do before? So the easiest analogy on this is if you didn't have a car and then all of a sudden you had a car. So if you didn't have a car and then you get a car, you would take that car and you would do the things that you used to be able to do. It would just be easier. It would be easier to go to the grocery store. It would be easier to go to church or the synagogue or the mosque. It would be easier to go see your friends and family. Faster, quicker, that sort of thing. And that's the phase we're in right now. We're improving the way that we've always done things. The next phase is I could take that car and I could drive to Detroit. I could take that car and I could drive to California. I couldn't do that before. That's opening things up in a way that I'm going to need to rethink our entire business. And that, I'm sure some of that stuff is happening right now, but that's where we're headed with this thing. And so, yes, there's hype around that, but even if you're just in that first phase, how do I make my day-to-day job easier, better, faster, connect with my audience better, all of those things. If you just stay right there, that's incredibly useful. If you get to that next phase, that's where things get really exciting. So yes, there's a lot of hype, and every company is saying that they're doing AI things, and that's fine and good. It's up to you as to whether you're improving the work that you do or whether you're doing new and exciting work.
Good, if we move on to the next, just for the sake of time. Okay, let's talk a little bit about practical business impact, right? Defining a goal for implementing AI, stuff like that. So one more of these things, there might be two more actually. Which business area do you think will be most impacted by AI? Or has been? So it resounding customer service, okay? Let's go back to there and let's start with this question. When technology becomes more human-centered, what difference does it make for employees, customers, or even brand loyalty? So we talked about, people saying they use AI in some fashion, but what do you think about it being more human-centered?
Well, it has to be. Why would you do it otherwise? I mean, what's the point of having any technology if it can't make life a little easier? I'm a hedonist, but hell yeah, if it doesn't make my life easier and happier, then I don't have time for that. So it has to be human-centered. That's why we invent these wonderful tools and techniques. But then we try and retrofit it with how's this going to be useful? It might be easy to start with a problem and then think through the potential solutions that AI has for solving those particular problems. I love hearing people say, we've got to be racing in the AI. We've got to be number one in AI. We're using AI. You go, well, what are you using it for? And then they start to go very quiet. Well, I don't know, stuff. Well, what stuff? What problems are you solving? If you're not solving problems for humans and the human endeavour, what's the point of using this stuff?
Well, to interject too, that's what we've been talking about in any technology, right? How does technology impact the end person, the business goal, all of that? Professor Keating, any comment?
No, let's keep going. Yeah.
All right. Any questions too? Just keep coming, all right? But we've got the next one. What happens when companies ignore the human impact in terms of reputation, trust, or real-world harm?
I'll answer that. So on the human side of things, we have to recognize that this thing is very different than the computers that we've used our whole lives. You in this room all understand how databases work. If you go to a database and you ask it a question, it's either going to return the answer or it's going to give some sort of error and say, I don't know the answer to that. It's not going to make things up. It's not going to force a correlation where one isn't there. That's how we've used computers our whole lives. If you ask it a question and it doesn't know the answer, you get an error. You get a 404 or something glamorous like that. That's not what this thing is, and we need to think of it differently. And the problem is, so we know that this thing may go off the rails. It may create a correlation where one isn't. It may hallucinate. It may do these things, or it may come up with something really innovative. But we have to recognize that just because that answer is coming back to us through the browser, through the app, it looks the exact same as an answer coming in from a database, but it's really an entirely different thing. And we have to think of it more as a thought partner and less as a source of truth.
Good. Okay, we'll take this audience one. Where do you believe the line is between AI helping and oppressing humans?
Sorry. I don't know, ask the Luddites of the 18th century. I mean, I'm sure they had their own concerns with the use of the Industrial Revolution and the tools and techniques that we use there. I don't feel oppressed by AI. I don't feel oppressed by most technologies because I'd like to think it helps me do a better job of the things that I want to do. So I'm not sure it's oppressing me.
How about annoying?
Annoying, yes, it's annoying as hell, absolutely.
I am pretty worried about this. And I don't think we have to go back very far to look for a really good example of it. But what I'm worried about is that it's the people at the margins of society that become oppressed. And it's the people who are not empowered currently with AI, who don't have a voice in it, that worries me. The other thing that worries me, and I'm sorry to be a little doom and gloom, but we have just seen a really good example of humans not knowing what to do with a very powerful technology, and it's social media. I think we can all agree in this room that there are some very, very negative parts of social media, and we didn't get that right yet, and we've launched full bore into AI, which might be a more powerful tool. And so it's up to all of us to advocate for those that are not represented in it, and educate ourselves to make sure that we're able to recognize how it can be used for negative things. I definitely have my worries about it.
You're right, and technical literacy has always been a big issue for a lot of us in education as well, the haves and the have-nots, and how we're fair with the use of some of these tools and techniques. Yeah, you're right.
Guys, how, we talked about defining, right, the use case. How can organizations tell if their AI strategy is actually working? How can you measure it, things of that nature?
It's a different set of risks, so being articulate about what the risks are if this thing goes wrong. ROI is a tough thing to do. I mean, you have faced some of these similar problems. How do you talk about the ROI of a safety and data security when you have prevented them? So what you put in place caused them not to happen. How do you say the ROI on that? It's a very hard thing to articulate. You just know that it's important to do it, to have those guardrails in place. And so, you know, what is the ROI on an AI project? It's a very hard thing to articulate at this point. You really do have to start with what we just talked about, which is, am I doing this for personal productivity? Am I doing this to make my workflow a little faster and easier? Or am I doing this at the enterprise level, and how do I measure that? That has got to be part of the project, is how do we know this thing is working or not working? But that's a good part of, you know, all the KPIs that you're all measured by and that you think about as you're implementing new products and new programs. That all still holds. You just have to think of it a little bit more creatively in terms of AI.
I go back to the furore of social media back in 2006, 2007, when people were saying ROI. What does that mean? Return on investment, yes. But what about return on ignoring this stuff as another powerful precursor, you know, trying to avoid these problems that we're likely to face? Maybe we don't know the impact of a particular system, but we sure as hell know that somebody else is using it effectively and probably going to steal a march in some form of competitive leap forward. So it's better to be in the game and at least playing in these spaces to get a sense of how people can experiment with this stuff, but playing in a safe, very transparent fashion and manner. So our IT does a pretty good job of that. We have show and tells with faculty, students and staff, and we actually show people how we're doing stuff. We have think tanks that come together now as part of our AI collaboration hub that will talk about the sorts of questions that we want answering and things that we wouldn't want to put into these these sorts of systems. And that's led to some really good eye-opening sort of gotcha moments for a number of people across campus.